The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Global Television Network.
What kind of society, I ask this audience, do you want to live in?
Manning is voting no is his contention that the Accord does not produce a Senate as intended.
We all need ideas to believe in, but as we're discovering, some of our most cherished ideas are turning to dust. It's not just the royal family that's in trouble today. It's the human family.
Terrible, terrible picture.
There's far more to solving humanity's deepest problems than the secrets of programming your subconscious or the latest relaxation techniques.
Try to find peace of mind in a world split between rich and poor, between love and hate, between the past and the present. In a world where it seems harder and harder just to keep up, how do you and your family establish the kind of lasting inner peace needed to cope? For the next 60 minutes, as we've done for almost 60 years, we'll be looking at these problems from a unique point of view, from the Bible's point of view, not as a book whose time has passed, but as a new and vibrant source of answers to finding peace of mind in today's world. Since 1934, the world tomorrow has been helping make sense of the world today. Its radio and television broadcasts are part of the public ministry of the Worldwide Church of God. From the very beginning, we've believed the answers to humanity's problems lie in this book. The underlying truth behind this belief has helped the Worldwide Church of God grow from a single congregation to over 99,000 members in 120 countries and territories, including 80 churches across Canada. Recently, one of our ministers, David Hume, came to Toronto to record this television special and to speak to Canadians about the problems facing them. The series of lectures that drew over 2,000 people to this theater in Toronto were sponsored by the Worldwide Church of God. While some who attended were already church members, many others came to hear about how a book, thousands of years old, could possibly be of any use to them today. Before his first lecture, we spoke with David Hume to find out just what his expectations were for the evening.
There are a lot of concerns out there, and of course, having peace of mind is really talking about a state of mind. It's talking about how to approach problems. It's fundamental to dealing with the problems that we all face, the traumas that come up every day. If you have peace of mind, and I mean by that a stable, calm mental state, despite what's happening, then you're going to be able to cope with what's going on. The world is going through one trauma after another, one great turmoil after another seems to be in the news. We look at what's happening internationally. We think about the Balkans, we say, how can these relationships have broken down? The Bible deals with the very themes that would resolve a lot of these problems if it were practiced. It's got great themes in it about forgiveness, mercy, about reconciliation, about people getting on with each other despite the difficulties. And that's why, for us, the Bible is relevant and important in the 1990s. The Bible essentially should be looked at fresh. It's a tragedy in the 20th century that the Bible, which is the underpinning of a lot of our moral code, has essentially been abandoned. It's been thrown on the trash heap. We think that's a terrible shame. We think that it's time that people took it out again and looked at it again and blew the dust off it and found out what it really says. And I think that's really the essence of why we're here in Toronto. We want to reintroduce Canadians to the idea that the Bible, in fact, is relevant in the 1990s.
And now, with today's program, Mr. David Newman.
What do Canadians see as they look out on the world of the 90s? It's almost a cliche now to say that the 1989 dismantling of the Berlin Wall has plunged us into a radically different world. The noted historian Barbara Tuchman commented at the time that it was as if the hand of God were turning a page in human fate. In the midst of these dramatic changes, some have said that a new world order is in the making. But the word order is proving to be premature. Like a vast glacier, the communist empire in Eastern Europe has receded. But so far, it's only brought a false spring. Names like Bosnia and Serbia have become household words, but not for the good. They signal the reappearance of some of Europe's oldest and bitterest rivalries. The Balkans, as Time magazine said recently, are back with a vengeance. As all of you know, Canadians from the peacekeeping forces have been drawn into the carnage already. And in one of history's strangest paradoxes, the collapse of the Soviet Empire has also led to frightening new worries. Worries about the spread of doomsday weapons that could erase our cities from the earth. The vision of Soviet nuclear weapons falling into the wrong hands and shudders through world capitals. Another growing tragedy that we see on our nightly newscasts is the rise of tribalism. Tribalism seems to be replacing nationalism as the wave of the future. It appears that every language group, every tribe, every cultural community is trying to be sovereign. Today we have over 170 sovereign states in the world, and some speculate it could be as many as 1,600 in the near future. So on the one hand, we seem to have disintegration, yet on the other, there are moves toward regional and global cooperation, like the European Community, or the North American Free Trade Agreement, or globalized communication. These activities indicate integration. Is it possible that the world is integrating and disintegrating at the same time? It's no secret that political leaders seem to be unable to understand, let alone control, all these new possibilities. The world's economic center of gravity has also shifted, and it's the Asian-Pacific region that commands our attention. As Pacific powers, Canada and the United States are trying to ride this trend into the 21st century. But will they? Will the third world sit idly by as the first world painfully readjusts its industrial base? Can enough men and women of goodwill be found to head off the protectionism and threats of trade retaliation we hear so much about? Well-known futurist and sociologist Alvin Toffler reports on the desire of what he calls the slow world to catch up with the fast world. But you know, headlong development doesn't seem to be the answer. It too can bring new problems. For example, the slash and burn practices in the Amazon rainforest leave scars on the lungs of the planet, our ecosystem. But slash and burn creates the grazing space for cattle that provide cheap hamburger for overfed North Americans. How long can these kinds of contradictions continue? All of this, you know, seems very reminiscent of what the prophet Isaiah wrote centuries ago when his own cozy world appeared to be unraveling. This is what he said: "We look for light, but all is darkness. For brightness, but we walk in deep shadows. Like the blind, we grope along the wall, feeling our way like men without eyes. We look for justice, but find none, for deliverance, but it is far away." It's been said that people can cope with a lot of tragedy and reversal if they experience a measure of fulfillment on the day-to-day level. But with today's economic storm clouds, it's becoming harder and harder to be optimistic. The Globe and Mail has ranked the economy as the #1 issue on Canadians' minds. The dream of owning a new home is slipping away from many people. Even two-income families are feeling the pressure. The hopes of a better life, of providing a college education for middle-class children, for example, these are stressful things to even begin thinking about. For some, like single-parent families and the elderly living on fixed incomes, it all becomes a bit much at times. All of this brings me to a common question. In such a world, how do we find lasting peace of mind? The newspapers chronicle our problems, and most of us worry about them, but we don't know what to do. How do we cope with the daily disorder we often experience? We worry about our health and our health care continuing. We worry about the future, about the kind of society our children will have to grow up in. How do we keep a sense of perspective? On the World Tomorrow program, we try to show how we can manage the turbulence around us. The answers that we give are biblical, they're sound, and they're effective. There are, of course, all kinds of people that want to tell us the various ways we can overcome anxiety. There are difficult times that we live in, and they're changing fast. Just recently, the noted Canadian author Peter Newman had this to say about the last couple of years in Canada.
History moves from watershed to watershed, according to its own agenda. The year just past will be recognized as such a watershed because so many of our touchstones have vanished.
Now, Newman is right. He said that in an article that he entitled "The Only Revolution That Can Save Canada." He goes on to say, we all need ideas to believe in, but as we're discovering, some of our most cherished ideas are turning to dust. Listen to this.
Generations of Canadians believed in members of the British monarchy, not as visiting foreign dignitaries, but as examples of quiet dignity and moral rectitude.
But as we all know, in 1992, scandals in the royal household were scattered across the supermarket tabloids. Newman concludes,
symbols die hard, but the British monarchy is dead.
Truly, it's not just the royal family that's in trouble today. It's the human family. There's the fear of returning epidemics. We fret and worry about where the money will come from for the next car repair. Sometimes we have to tell the kids that we have to have an operation. Life does present us with traumas. It seems that it's just like the author of the book of Job wrote centuries ago. He said, man, or humankind, is born to trouble as the sparks fly upward. For the individual caught up in the turmoil, coping is arduous, painful, and sometimes prolonged. Society's plight is made worse because of the fact that some of the traditional support systems seem so weak. The family, the small town, the school, the church. All these have become centers of crisis rather than ports in the storm. And if you think about it, selfish individualism appears to be the norm. One of Canada's leading sociologists, Reg Bibby, is a good friend of mine. He recently said, individually, we've been emancipated, but, he added, socially, we're in disarray. That's to say, we have personal freedom and social disarray at one and the same time. It's a troubling conflict. Yet, without oversimplifying or minimizing the contradictions we face, there are ways to find peace of mind in the 1990s. What do I mean by peace of mind? Well, I mean a mind not subject to constant anxiety when pressures build, a calm, quiet, stable mental state in spite of the circumstances. There are, of course, the merchandisers of peace of mind, but too often the answers they give are merely physical. I'm talking about the self-help books or the tapes or the devices that purport to deal with life's every challenge. It seems that from stress to success, from finances to physique, someone has a patent out on problem solving. But are there solutions? There's far more to solving humanity's deepest problems than the secrets of programming your subconscious or the latest relaxation techniques. The real answers, the answers that bring lasting solutions, are spiritual in nature. They're not physical palliatives like a headache capsule or a cold remedy. The real and lasting solutions are derived from spiritual principles, and they require that we exercise godly faith. Before we can do that, of course, we need to know that God is real, that he exists, and that he's personally interested in us. The New Testament tells us anyone who comes to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. As individuals, we need to believe that God is our Father, that he cares for us in all circumstances, and that he has a plan for our lives now and in the future. By that standard, you see, today's physical answers to stressful or traumatic situations are too often weak and ineffective. So now, in exploring the peace of mind we all yearn for in times of crisis, we'll cover three main points. These are beginning steps we can take toward achieving a mind free of worry and anxiety. First, then, we need to know that God exists. Then we need to know what God requires. And thirdly, we need to build a relationship with God. But how can we know that God does exist? Normally, Canadians are a little reticent to discuss God and religion. But there is growing evidence that the whole subject is lying there not far below the surface. In 1990, a journalist called Ron Graham published a book that was nominated for an award. The book is called God's Dominion. Its subtitle is A Skeptic's Quest. Graham made a 2-year trek across Canada, conducting interviews far and wide. He talked to Anglicans in Newfoundland, Aboriginals in the north, and even cult groups in the interior of British Columbia. Graham's conclusion at the end of his 2-year odyssey was quite surprising. This is what he said.
For all the talk of Canada as a secular and materialist country, there seems to be more and more attention to spiritual issues. Hardly a day passes without a front-page headline directly or indirectly about religion.
He then goes on to list the kinds of things he's talking about that appear in the headlines. The Supreme Court decision on abortion, the Ontario government's decision to extend public funding of Catholic schools, sex scandals in Newfoundland and Quebec involving priests and preachers, Jewish lobbies protesting Ottawa's policies toward the Middle East, Sikhs standing trial in British Columbia, Christian racists in Alberta and New Brunswick. Graham says that much of this preoccupation with religious themes may be a leftover from the battles with old Victorian standards. However, as he himself concludes,
some of it exists because the great questions of being, meaning, behaving, and dying can never go away.
The Apostle Paul addressed some of these great questions of being and meaning over 1900 years ago. He also sketched out an answer in finding peace of mind. Paul, you see, knew that only God and God alone could provide the solace amid the turmoil. He knew that God was real. Here's what he wrote to the first century church in Rome. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. To the first century Christians, the reality of the Creator God was not in doubt. Paul explained to a group of listeners the connection between the Creator and his care for creation. Canadians who possess one of the most enviable pieces of real estate on the earth should be able to relate to this. Paul writes, "In the past, he let all nations go their own way. Yet he has not left himself without testimony. He has shown kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their seasons. He provides you with plenty of food and fills your hearts with joy." That kind of simple belief in God's loving concern has all but disappeared in our materially self-sufficient world. Yet, without that childlike trust, our contact with our Father is terribly limited. Knowing that God exists and that He cares is the starting point for a right relationship. In Canada, we don't have to look far to see evidence of a creator. I'm sure many of us have taken our children out into the woods or along the many fine hiking trails. And no doubt you've sometimes noticed badly scarred or burnt trees. I recently saw such a tree with an A-shaped gash stretching some 30 feet up the trunk. It was caused by fire. But the tree had continued to survive and grow for many years. These are object lessons for us from the natural world. The tree I encountered was a startling example of growth despite the adversity of fire. It seems like much of God's handiwork has a built-in bias to survive. But what about us as human beings? Faced with such trials and tribulations, how would we have coped? When fire strikes us, do we survive and continue our development? Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the greatest teacher the world has ever known, often used nature as his classroom. Jesus of Nazareth is still remembered for using the physical to teach the spiritual. There's a well-known part of his teaching where he focuses on God's care for us. Christ tells us, in essence, that as God takes care of the creation, he will take care of us, but even more so. This teaching is found in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 6. "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes? And why do we worry about clothes? See how the lilies of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith?" It's a powerful message showing the importance of directly trusting our Father for our everyday needs. It's speaking of a relationship that's both simple and profound. But this kind of trust is not something we hear about much in our sophisticated, high-tech world. Yet it is the basis of faith in God's power to intervene for our well-being. Jesus Christ went on to set the priorities for his followers by saying this, "So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans or non-Christians run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." In other words, there's enough to be concerned about on a daily basis without being overly worried about future needs. Now, that is not to say that we should not be concerned about the future in some way, or that all plans about the future are unhealthy. It's the over-anxious state of mind that Jesus is focusing on here. The point is that the things we need today, God will provide in answer to believing prayer. And that introduces another principle for those who come to trust in God's existence. Writing to the early New Testament church, James said, "If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That man should not think he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all that he does." In other words, we can only expect an answer from God when we pray in faith. It's a principle that applies to all prayer to God. Finding peace of mind and tranquility through answered prayer depends on wholehearted belief in God's capacity and willingness to answer. Of course, developing a right relationship with God goes beyond the belief that He exists. And that brings us to our second main point this evening. It's this: to gain peace of mind in the midst of turmoil, we have to know that God requires something of us. We have to know what it is that He requires. People often ask, has the Bible really helped anyone? And I would have to say that, in my experience, it's helped thousands of people. There are many members of the Worldwide Church of God around the world that I've dealt with, and they find that it helps them establish relationships in a right way. So people become better husbands, better wives, they become better parents, they become better employers and employees. They find a way to relate to each other based on what the Bible teaches. And this is very important in the kind of world we live in, where there's a fragmentation of those relationships going on.
Well, I think the church is very relevant, given the state of the economy, marriage and family. Perhaps that's one of the biggest values, is the fact that the church does stress marriage and family, and the purpose of it, how it can be beneficial to everybody involved. You know, having a close-knit family, everybody working together as a teamwork, something that you'd want to find on your job, for instance.
Everything is family-oriented. You do things together as a family. You obey God's word because of the good things it will do for your family and for yourselves. Religion, the Bible, you know, the Ten Commandments, all those things are stressed, but everything is encased as a whole in the family and the love and the relationships between people.
What we do is we look at the Bible, and the Bible gives us the framework, and the essential gospel is our real concern for other human beings, that it's not the doctrine so much, but it's our relationship with human beings, loving, caring for, being concerned about people, not only people within the church itself, which would be a very narrow view, but people on the outside, people whom we have never met, that everyone is our neighbor.
And when we talk about friendship and fellowship, we're strong on that in the church, fellowship and friendship, and looking after each other, but also looking at the people who are depending upon food banks, people who are in the streets today. These people are getting torn apart in Bosnia, you know, in Somalia. Without that kind of compassion, this is part of our teaching. Think about what's going on, about the other people. And so these are some of the values that we look at.
There's very little cliquing or much of a class system. Everybody speaks to everybody, and people come from very many different walks of life. Some are single parents, some come from large families, some small families, and from many different occupations as well. So it's a good cross-section of society, I would say.
The church is very much, it's a community of believers, people that have the same goals, where they're going and why they're alive and what they want to do with their lives and what they see as important in life. And it's very much a very strong like-mindedness thing, even though it's divergent, people from different walks of life coming together. There's a real sense of community there, which is very important when you're raising children.
I want our children to follow in our footsteps. I want them to see by our example that living the way that we live is a life that reaps good things, you know, happiness, peace of mind. Like I said before, I don't want my children to be frustrated because this is a difficult world to live in.
Seeing with so many people having so many different ideas and what they stand for, the church really offers a balanced approach to my life and allows me to see where my life is going and be able to have some perspective towards that.
Any kind of learning, you know, that is helping you to grow, to mature more, really, it has to help you, you know, see things in a different light. And you tend not to be as anxious about things. you tend to have another perspective. You're not rushing about in the everyday helter-skelter without thinking about what you're doing.
The church gives a person an organizer, a framework in which that person can organize his life or her life and to make sense. And so if a person is coming to terms with his life or her life, wanting answers to the big questions, what the church does is to give the person a path on which that person can walk and find peace of mind. And each person comes to the church with different needs.
No matter how bad you are off, there's always somebody else that may be a little bit worse off. So when you keep the balanced approach to that and not just think upon it all, just yourself, that woe is me type of thing, but it helps keep it in perspective.
And the bottom line, when you're 70 years old and you're sitting there in the rocking chair, it didn't matter whether you attained this level or that level. When it gets down to it, what matters is the things that you enjoy in life, where you're going, why you're here, who you are.
We believe in God, that God looks after us, that we can trust in him and gain strength from him, you know, and that the Bible shows us how to live the right way, and how to have peace of mind. That's what above all things, I want my children to have peace of mind, I really do.
The World Tomorrow. The Radio Church of God presents Herbert W. Armstrong, bringing you the plain truth about today's world news and the prophecies of the world tomorrow.
And greetings, friends. This is Herbert W. Armstrong with the good news of the world tomorrow. Well, why do we have such bad news in the world today? Recently, I've been asking in a number of these programs, why does God permit wars? Why does God permit so much suffering in the world today? Because if God...
Canadians first heard the message of the world